Hey, what's up guys and gals? My name is Rick9G. Thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to be looking at Batman, the 1960s television show. And I'll be looking at the arch villain, Mr. Freeze. Now, Mr. Freeze began as Mr. Zero in the comic books, but later for the show he was changed to the name Mr. Freeze. And I'm going to specifically focus on his costume, primarily on his helmet. The helmet on Mr. Freeze was iconic. Along with his gun, it basically made the entire character. Now, he was actually played by 3 different actors during the course of this series. First, he was actually played by George Sanders. Then later on, he was played by Otto Preminger. And finally by Eli Wallach. Now, I won't go into why one actor left and the other one came in. I'll leave that for another video. But here, I just want to focus on the different iterations of the helmet and what was used for the headgear. Now, of course, we're going to begin with Instant Freeze and Rats Like Cheese. In those 2 episodes, which is of course one full story, he was played by George Sanders, and he had this helmet which pretty much completely covered his entire head. Now, the problems that were created from that helmet were vast, and they contributed to the difficulty of this episode. Now, looking at the story from the costume designer of the show, Jan Kemp, we can get an idea of what happened during this episode. Now, she said that everybody, including George Sanders, felt that the actor should be in a helmet. The character of Mr. Freeze absolutely called for it. Now, the point that Jan made was that you were going to have difficulty with his speech. That was something that was immediately recognized. In fact, during the course of these 2 episodes for George Sanders, they had to dub most of his dialogue at a later date. So they basically filmed the entire episode. He made the dialogue within the confines of the helmet, and it was really hard for him to be heard, so that they had to go back, and again, he had to record the entire audio for his character, and they had to replace it. And if you look, pretty much most of the time, the lines don't match up to his lips. Now, they actually tried something which didn't work, and that's that they put these little miniature microphones inside the helmet to try to grab the audio from George Sanders, the actor. But unfortunately, there was still a problem, because they had resonance inside the helmet that kind of echoed his audio, so it sounded really unnatural, and it was unpleasant to hear. It could be pretty much compared to when you put your head inside a bucket and you talk. That resonance, that was not something that looked well or came well through television. By all accounts, it said that George Sanders sounded like he was talking inside an oil drum. Now, they had a very specific problem also for the character villain Bane in the 2012 version of The Dark Knight Rises, and they also had to redub all of his audio in that movie, which is something very similar found on a later date, but with 2 different villains from the Batman story. So very cool. And then, as previously mentioned, there were 2 other actors in season 2, Green Ice and Deep Freeze. We see the rendition of Mr. Freeze by Otto Preminger. Then later in I Spy and the duo Defy, we have Eli Wallach playing Mr. Freeze. Now, going back to Preminger, when he assumed the role, they actually took away the helmet, as you can see, and they gave him this collar that had little type sprinklers. Well, that's at least what they look like, little jets that, according to the story, blew out cold ice around him. Remember, the character was this man who had been in an accident, and he had to remain under sub-zero temperatures in order to survive. So that's how they went around the story of him having to wear the helmet. In actual fact, this was a point they made in the script about this, and he had to be wearing that device to keep him alive and to keep him cool. And for the episodes with Eli Wallach, they also decided to use that similar ring, that similar little cool jet idea. And I don't know, I would love to know what your thoughts are. Do you prefer the look of a helmet, or maybe an updated helmet to what George Sanders had? Because honestly, it wasn't the best looking helmet, but it got the point across to what they were trying to do. Remember, also the constraints of a show from the 1960s. Whose rendition did you prefer? George Sanders, Otto Preminger, or Eli Wallach? I'd love to know your thoughts down below. I'm not a super fan of the idea of those cooling jets. In later iterations of the character, they went back to a full helmet. But yeah, I'm not a big fan of the jets. I understood why they did it. I love the George Sanders look a little bit more, but then it also gave the actors a little bit more flexibility, both for Otto and Eli, to be able to perform in this role. Thank you so much, guys and gals. Let me know your thoughts down below. Who was your favorite? We'll see you all next time, and don't forget, be hopeful. Thank you to my Diamond tier patrons, Andrew B, Ricky, and David D. And thank you to every single one of my Patreons where I have exclusive content. Be sure to look in the description below for merchandise, Patreon exclusive content, as well as playlists where you can find other TV shows and sitcoms that I think you'll enjoy. We'll see you all next time.